Hello, welcome. Good afternoon, good evening, good morning, everybody. I hope you're all well. You're all most welcome to this 12th and final session in the Keeping the Dream Alive series by the World Tourism Association for Culture and Heritage, My Travel Research, and Low Season Traveller. Also like to give a special welcome and a shout out to all of our World Tourism Association for Culture and Heritage members and supporters that have joined us this morning as well. Before we get started, as always, for all of the regulars, you'll know the general housekeeping rules. You're all on mute to avoid background noise, but please do use the chat function to let us know that you're here. Give us a shout out, let us know where you're calling in from, and use that as well for any general comments. Also, please do use the questions function for today's session. So use the questions function on the sidebar that you'll see there, and we'll try and get through as many questions as we can during the Q&A session. Again, just to reiterate, please use that for questions rather than general comments. If you put general comments in the comment section, then we'll read out the appropriate ones for that as well. As you know, all sessions will be recorded, and we'll send out links to the recordings shortly after each session. We'll also release the Q&A from each session as a podcast on the Low Season Traveller Insider Guides podcast series, which you can find on iTunes, Spotify, and of course the wetac.org website. So as I said, this is the 12th session, the final session. Can you believe? After 6 weeks of doing 2 every week, we've now arrived at the final session. And it's really appropriate that we've got a great speaker, which I'll introduce you to just shortly. First of all, let me introduce myself. For those of you that don't know me, if there's any new listeners on, my name's Jed Brown, and I'm the founder of Low Season Traveller, and I'm also the managing director in EMEA of the World Tourism Association for Culture and Heritage. And it has been absolutely an honour and a pleasure to have been your moderator for this entire series. So this episode is entitled Facts, Not Fear. Oops. And it's a real-time insight into the current travel trends as to where we're up to at the moment. And we've got the perfect speaker for you today. We've got Olivier Ponti with us today, who is the leader of the Foward Keys Insights team. Olivier is one of the world's most authoritative experts in travel research and destination marketing. He gives dozens, probably more than dozens, of conference presentations and media interviews every year, cross-referencing Foward Keys' considerable data with numerous other sources to identify new travel trends, forecast future travel patterns, reveal the impact of events on travel, and provide deep insights into the travelers of tomorrow. Previously, Olivier was research manager at Amsterdam Marketing, where he helped attract tourism and business investment to the city by extensive use of market research and, of course, compelling presentations. Latterly, as Amsterdam became increasingly popular, his data-driven approach was at the heart of successful initiatives to balance the demands of visitors, residents, and businesses. Very much linked to what we were talking about on Tuesday, actually. Olivier Ponti's career in city tourism started in 2004, where he was appointed manager of the tourism research department of the Paris Visitors and Convention Bureau. Olivier was educated at Sciences Po in Paris, where he gained a master's degree in economics, and at the Sorbonne University, where he gained a master's degree in tourism development. His connection to academia continues as he teaches market intelligence at the Sorbonne still. So a very good morning to you, Olivier. It's a pleasure to have you with us, and welcome to the Tourism Expert Recovery Series. How are you? Join me up on stage.
Good morning, Jed. It's a real pleasure to be here. Thank you so much for inviting me. I've been following what you guys have been doing in the past weeks with this series of webinars, listening to the podcast while I was doing some sport in the morning, and I'm really honored to be here with you today and be the last of the presenters. So thank you very much for this. Just make sure that you can all see my screen.
There we go. It should come on just shortly. I'll turn my camera off now, Olivier. So we can just see you at the moment still, Olivier. There we go. So we can see your desktop now.
Excellent. Can you confirm you can see the presentation?
We can see a sprinter, and we can see facts not fear, and we can see today's date.
Excellent,
Perfect.
because this is the title of this presentation.
Perfect.
Facts not fear.
The floor is yours. Thanks, Olivier.
Exactly. Look, Jet, when we first talked about this presentation a few weeks ago, and we discussed the title, this title, "Facts Not Fear," seemed quite appropriate. A lot of tourism businesses were in panic mode, and we thought that it would be really interesting for everybody to put some facts on the table. It turns out that since we had this discussion, the situation has evolved quite significantly worldwide. We're seeing a number of destinations reopening. We're all looking at what's happening in China on the domestic Chinese market, and this gives a lot of people in the industry hope, and sometimes wild hopes. So I think we could have also entitled these presentations "Facts Not Fear Nor Wild Optimism." And this is what I'm going to show during this presentation. We see that there are some things changing on the market at the moment, but this should lead us to very cautious optimism. So without further ado, let's have a look at the facts. Although I believe it's important, before we start talking about the facts, to say a few words about where the data comes from. I work for Foward Keys. We're a travel analytics company. We're based in Valencia, Spain. And what we do is use different big data sets to monitor trends on the air travel, on air travel. We do this looking at the different steps of the traveler's journey. From the moment people start searching a flight on meta search engines like Skyscanner, to the moment that airlines put capacity on the market. So tell the consumer, hey, we've got some planes flying from point A to B. It's that kind of planes. It's that many seats. And this is really important for understanding the market. This close look at the offer. So that's something we monitor with the help of Cirium. We keep a close watch on events and make sure that we can link events to booking behavior. Booking and ticketing are two of our key data sets. We work very closely with GDSs, with more than 100 airlines, to get a good understanding of what's happening on the booking and ticketing front. That gives us probably the most comprehensive data set on the matter in the world. And then we use this information to build extra layers of intelligence on top of these foundations. So these are the key data sets that I will be using for this presentation. I've selected 5 facts that I consider as key learnings of the current crisis. And the first fact is that straight lines don't last forever. For years now, we've grown accustomed to seeing charts projecting a never-ending growth. That growth could take the shape of air passengers, of tourist arrivals, hotel rooms, Airbnbs, other forms of accommodation. We've grown accustomed to seeing those numbers just grow, basically, from one year to the others. And in that context, it was reasonable to assume, based on what we knew that back then, that this growth would continue. I mean, there's never been as many people able and willing to travel. It's never been cheaper for people to travel, especially by air. And honestly, when looking at those straight lines showing the growth in number of air passengers, it's nearly impossible not to imagine that straight line continuing in the future. All of these were reasonable assumptions until not long ago, and yet now I believe that we know better. We switched in a matter of months from over tourism to no tourism. What you can see on this slide is the number of international arrivals, air arrivals by world region for the month of May. And it doesn't, make any difference where you're looking at on this map. The results are pretty much the same everywhere. We're looking at a massive decrease of air arrivals, minus 97% worldwide, and this is really affecting all regions. So what this means is that the travel sector has entered into coma, and what we're all hoping is that it will get out of it as soon as possible. So no arrivals in the past month, and what's even more worrying is that there were no bookings either. So this chart shows on a weekly basis the number of bookings that have been made for a trip anytime in the future, and it looks at the various key source markets: Asia Pacific, Europe, the Americas, Africa, and the Middle East. As you can see, since the beginning of March, we are in this unprecedented situation when there are more cancellations than bookings for all key source markets. So if people do not book now, if they haven't booked in the past weeks, it's very unlikely that we are going to see them in our destinations in the coming month. And this is why the summer outlook looks so bleak. Total arrivals, international arrivals worldwide are 83% behind their 2019 levels. All key destinations are affected in similar ways. So basically what we have now are bookings that were made a long time ago and that could very easily vanish as we get closer to the departure date. This situation has a lot to do with the fact that in a very, very short period of time, the world basically shut down. And we saw travel restrictions being put in place everywhere around the world, and that makes the reopening of those destinations a prerequisite to any recovery scenario. We cannot have reopening, we cannot have recovery without a lifting of travel restrictions. This is the state of travel restrictions worldwide at the end of last week. And as you can see, there's not a single country in the world without a form of travel restriction. Obviously, if your business depends on international travel, you cannot survive for long in a world like that. Now, fortunately for the travel sector, the situation is evolving at a fast pace. We're seeing travel bubbles being put in place. Thinking of the Baltic states, for example, or between Norway and Denmark. I know there's been a lot of talks about a trans-Tasman travel bubble, but it hasn't materialized yet. This is a way for destinations to reignite international travel, but as we can see, it's quite cumbersome. At least it's not easy to put in place. We're also seeing a lot of bilateral agreements being signed to facilitate business travel. Very recently, so one being signed between China and Singapore. Before there was one between China and South Korea. For example, so that's another modality of the reopening. But most importantly, some destinations are communicating on a reopening of the market, saying that they are open for business again, whether it's just for domestic tourism or for international tourism as well. This week, as we speak, we've got destinations like St. Lucia in the Caribbean, Austria, or Italy in Europe, communicating on a gradual reopening. But when you start looking at the details of these reopenings, you realize that these destinations remain closed to some, if not most, of the countries. Austria is reopening, yes, that's true, but not for Italians, for example. Or St. Lucia is reopening, but just for travelers from the US. So I believe there is still a long way to go if we want to go back to the pre-crisis situation. Now, the next fact has to do with air capacity, which has reached rock bottom. We know just how important air travel is for international tourism. And for air travel to be able to function properly, we need planes. What you can see on this chart is that international capacity is just a fraction of what it used to be, less than 10% compared to 2019 levels. We know that airlines are fighting for survival. They're selling part of their fleet, they're firing their staff, they're seeking government bailouts. It is not clear at this stage how many airlines will make it in the end, but it is clear that air connectivity has received a very serious blow and that it will not recover overnight. Now let's have a look at some of the positive signs of the current situation. Contrary to previous crises, I believe we are now better equipped to identify early signs of recovery and leverage them. Think of SARS, think of 9/11, think of the last financial crisis. At the time, we did not have all the data that we currently have at hand, to understand what was going on, to identify opportunities, and to make sure that we could act on these insights. Luckily, we're a bit further down the road of digital transformation and then big data. So the situation is significantly different. And when trying to identify early signs of recovery now, we see that there are indeed some, but that they need a very careful analysis so that we understand what recovery truly means and how to interpret those pictures we see in the news, for example, of visitors being back in key tourist attractions such as Chinese tourist attractions, for example. Let's focus on China first, because this is probably the country that's been most in the news when it comes to recovery. That's where people are putting their hope, and this is a fascinating country because it's been the hardest hit in the early stage of the crisis, but it looks like it's also the first country to progressively get out of the crisis. So what can we learn from this this case? Well, we've all seen it. Pictures of attractions, popular attractions being completely empty, and then pictures of those attractions welcoming a number of tourists again. So what's behind this? Who are these tourists? What's behind those figures that we hear as well from the industry regarding the rise of occupancy rate in hotels, etc., etc. Now, we looked at the development of Chinese domestic air travel. And here we're looking at the situation since the beginning of this year. We're looking at tickets being issued. Now, very clearly, end of January, we see a drop in the number of tickets being issued. That's when the first travel restrictions are being put in place. This is where the crisis, the COVID crisis starts getting bigger and bigger. We hit rock bottom at the end of February, and then there is a slow rebound taking place. It has a lot to do with the Chinese economy getting back on track. So we've got some form of recovery, but we can still see that this rebound is limited in time. And from the end of February, we still can notice growth, but this growth is very, very gradual. This has to do with the fact that a lot of people that had been trapped during the Chinese New Year were able to go back to their normal place of residence, their usual place of residence, and that there is a basic level of economic activity taking place, but it's nothing like the recovery the whole tourism sector is hoping for. It's mainly commercial centers benefiting from this growth in domestic air travel instead of typical leisure destinations. So this recovery since then is still happening. We see, you can see at the end of April, beginning of May, another bump, let's say, in the recovery. That's the Labor Day weekend, which coincided with the lifting of some internal travel restrictions. So we can see that there is demand, but this demand is still very fragile. And this recovery, when you start looking at it in details, is mainly affecting specific groups of people. It's mainly the young being more likely to travel. We can see a lot of students flying back to their university. So it's gradual coming back to normal, I would say, rather than a jump in domestic tourism. And this is something to take into account, because when you look at those figures regarding air traffic, you start to realize that the people you see on the pictures on the Forbidden City or the Great Wall of China are mainly pictures of locals. It's local tourism taking place. A lot of people going to their destination by high-speed train or by car rather than by plane. So yes, this is encouraging, but it will take a while before we get back to normal. And the insights that many, or the conclusion that many brands have taken based on this data is that at the moment, if you want to do business with Chinese people, you have to do business with them in China, because we can see no sign of recovery on the Chinese outbound market at the moment. Now, moving on to a different part of the world, Latin America, I think it's an interesting example to look at as well, because while China is, or yes, while China and a number of other destinations are slowly getting a grip on the epidemics, it is still raging in South America. And it's interesting to look at the way people book or do not book South America, because it tells us what the expectations are regarding the evolution of the pandemic. So here we've selected one of the key markets for the destination, which is the United Kingdom, and we looked at bookings that were made in the last week of May. So that was last week. Obviously, there were still more cancellations than bookings. So the overall picture is very well. No, sorry, there were very slightly more bookings than cancellations. We see that bookings are 96%, about 96% behind. So the overall picture is quite negative, but there were still some new bookings being made. So it was interesting to look at the departure date for these bookings. And as you can see on this chart, bookings for the coming month are flat. It's only in Q1 of 2021 that we start seeing some bookings. So at the moment, UK people from the UK considering a trip to Latin America do not envision this trip before Easter next year. And even then, we can see that the number of bookings for Easter that was performed last week is way lower than during the same period just a year ago. So no clear recovery scenario for this destination at the moment. Now, if we look at the Caribbean, where a growing number of destinations are communicating on reopening, we see some signs of hope as well. Here we've decided to focus on searches that travelers from the Netherlands are performing on Skyscanner for a future trip, and we're trying to see where they think that trip could take place. And here we've got a pretty clear picture of the situation. As you can see, a strong increase proportionally of bookings, of searches for a trip with a departure in December. So when it comes to the Caribbean, the Caribbean holiday, people from the Netherlands are more considering a Christmas holiday in the Caribbean than a summer holiday. And this is also something we can see in booking patterns. This is the regular booking patterns for trips from the Netherlands to the Caribbean. We're looking at when exactly trips to take place in October, November, and December are booked. There's a lot of last-minute bookings, and these bookings are yet to come. But interestingly enough, the bookings that are still that were made in the past month are still there, meaning that people have a wait-and-see attitude. They're still booking, even though at a very slow pace, but they're not canceling, and that's the most interesting part of it, because in many other destinations, if you look at bookings for the summer, for example, you'd see that the general pattern was to massively cancel those trips. People are still hoping that they will be able to travel this winter, and well, I guess we'll hope they are right. Now, final part of the world, or the last part of the world I would like to look at in this presentation is Europe, where a number of key destinations have communicated on a reopening. And what we can see at this stage is that communication on reopenings is, in a way, reigniting bookings, and that's very interesting. If we look at Spain, for example, and look at the tickets being issued for international flights to Spain for a trip this summer, June, July, and August, we can see a very depressing trend from beginning of March, where bookings, I mean, the number of tickets being issued completely dropped, and then it was flat, close to 0% until the very end of May. On the 23rd of May, the Spanish government announced that Spain would be soon open to foreign tourists starting on July 1st. And you can see an immediate impact of this announcement on booking patterns. You can start to see the bookings bouncing back. And it's not only Spain, it's pretty much every destination we have looked at in the past few days. This is Greece, very similar pattern, even more pronounced. The Greek government announced on the 20th of May that Greece would be open to foreign tourists again, and immediately we see the number of bookings bouncing back. So this is encouraging, but remember that picture of that chart of booking situation for the summer. I very seriously doubt that with the current state of bookings, the industry will manage to catch up for the summer. This will be a horrible summer for the industry. And that leads me to the last of the 5 facts I wanted to mention, and it is that reopening is not the same as recovery. Yes, we're seeing some booking activity taking place. So again, we're seeing that the sector is progressively getting out of coma, but it's definitely not ready to run a marathon. For true recovery to take place, I believe that the lifting of travel restriction is paramount. We need this to happen if we want true recovery to take place. And then I believe we need 2 key things on the supply side. It's air capacity. We need those planes to fly again. We need a decent load factor so that airlines can do business and bring people to the destinations of their choice. And we need those destinations to be open for business. It's absolutely key. So we need hotels to be open. We need tourist attractions to be open. We need restaurants to be open, etc., etc. That's a crucial component of any recovery scenario. And on the demand side, we need consumer confidence to come back. It's been shattered in the past few months with I think of airlines canceling flights by the thousands and not giving proper refund to customers. Airlines offering flights to destinations that are still not open for business. So I think this has very seriously, very negatively impacted on consumer confidence, and this needs to be built up again if we want people to feel confident enough to travel. And they also need, of course, to feel safe while traveling. And the last element on the demand side is the cash. We need travelers to have enough disposable income to travel, and with the terrible recession that is looming, I believe this is going to be a very serious issue in the coming month or year. And don't forget either that the travel sector is also competing with other economic sectors. When you are a Spanish person that has spent a number of months in complete lockdown, what is it that you will want to do with your money? Will you go for a trip? Or will you decide to invest this money in making your stay at home more comfortable? That's a question many people will ask themselves. We tend to think that destinations are competing against each others, and that's true. But travel is competing against other forms of activity, and we should keep that in mind. So to conclude, I believe maybe the one big opportunity that this crisis is offering us is the opportunity to be truly data-driven. Many tourism businesses have been lagging behind on this matter. They know that it's important to be smart, but they've never made the necessary investments to make it happen. Now they will have to do it if they want to survive. You will have to be smart in the way you use your very limited resources, financial resources, and this is something that that this crisis is um, uh, helping you do. That is, identify the information that is truly relevant for you, so that you can derive insights that will help you do business better. So when demand picks up, and I hope it will be soon, but I'm not widely optimistic about it, as you have understood. You will be ready to grow your business in a sustainable way. So I thank you for your attention, and I believe it is now time for question and answers. Jed, back to you.
Thank you so much for that, Olivier. Gosh, again, an awful lot to pick through there. You know, there's a lot of as we would expect. There's a lot of bad news stuff in there, as well as signs for optimism. I suppose just at the top, and as we're waiting for more of the questions to come in, you guys at Foward Keys, you know, obviously you've got a fantastic array and set of data, and you use this, I know from first-hand experience, to measure the impact, as you said, of different events. So, you know, when something happens in the world that affects global tourism, as pretty much everything does, be it the global financial crisis in 2008, whether it's SARS, whether it's a tsunami or a hurricane, you know, you can kind of see how quickly everything gets back to quote unquote normal. I suppose, can you quantify it for us just how different and unique this situation has been in terms of viewing a recovery? Is this actually changing the way in which we view recovery? You know, with the other disasters that you always monitored, was there a sort of a set recovery time and a recovery plan as to how resilient the industry was? Just give us a sort of a quantification for how unique this is. And I suppose then a secondary question following on from that is, you know, all of this, whilst it is utterly horrendous, the data that obviously you're gathering right now is obviously going to be incredibly useful in the future for, God forbid, similar disasters as well. Is that another plus that we can take from that as well?
Mm-hmm. Okay, that's a lot of questions, Jed.
I know, sorry.
Okay, let's start with the beginning. Yes, we're monitoring crisis all the time, all kinds of most of the time negative events, and there are different patterns, you know, but recovery in general is a matter of months. You know, within 6 to 12 months, usually you're back on track, unless you have different waves within this crisis. So if you are a destination having to face a terror attack, for example, or a hurricane, people register the fact that something bad has happened. Typically, you'll see a drop in bookings, you'll see a surge in cancellations, and this will last for a little while until people understand that it's safe to travel to this destination again, that the destination is open for business again. We've seen that very recently with the Bahamas, for example, that was hit by a horrible hurricane. And 2 months after the fact, thanks to their very efficient communication on we're open for business, it's just 2 of our key islands that have been hit, the rest is okay. If you really want to help us recover, please come spend your holidays in your destination, etc. Within 2 months, they were back at about 80% of pre-crisis levels. That went extremely fast. At the other end of the spectrum, you have destinations like Tunisia, who have experienced repeated waves of terror attacks. And the first time it happens, people think, okay, it may happen, and then things will be back on track. And it's when people start booking again that there is a second terror attack. And then consumer confidence is very severely damaged. That's what I call by a crisis in different waves. People may consider your destination again if they believe that the crisis is over. But if there is still a risk that this crisis can start again, then it can take years for a destination to recover. So what makes this current crisis different from what we've experienced in the past? I believe it's the fact that it's not only the problem of one destination or one key source market, it's the global travel ecosystem that has been hit. It's people worldwide not booking a holiday. It's destination worldwide not being able or not being willing even to welcome more tourists. And that's what's really worrying about it. The travel ecosystem is broken. The travel chain is broken, and it's very difficult to imagine how we could put this back in place in a very short time.
Is this one of the first times that we've ever seen where both supply and demand have both taken the hit immediately? Is that actually, when you break it down, is that the unique differentiator for the current crisis that we're going through compared to others? Whereas for others, a hurricane or tsunami or whatever else, the main effect is the demand just drops off, not necessarily the supply. The supply might drop off as a consequence of the demand dropping off. But is that where this is unique? It's the fact that it's both sides that have immediately taken that hit.
I think we've seen it in different parts of the world already, but it was very localized and it was on a completely different scale. Going back to the Caribbean, think of now hang on, I forgot the name of this destination, but 2 years before the Dorian hurricane, there was a major hurricane hitting the Caribbean, and we had one destination there whose name unfortunately I forgot, that was also very, very seriously hit. And this destination had its main airport, its only airport, destroyed. So here we're in a situation when there is no demand because people have seen pictures of this island being completely destroyed. I think it's St. Martin. And in the meantime, there is no supply because planes cannot fly there.
Yeah.
Okay, so it's kind of a similar situation, but the scale is so completely different that the current crisis is in a completely different league.
Yeah, it's fascinating. At this point, I want to bring in, because it's our last episode, I'd like to bring in Chris and Carolyn to join us up here as well, because I know that they've got some questions. And Carolyn had a really good question about lead times, actually, and the trend for lead times. So I'll hand over to you on that one, Carolyn, to ask that question.
Okay, well, I was going to let Chris speak first. Chris, did you want to add anything before I did that? I was going to be polite because I've been grabbing the threshold with all my questions. I come from a research background myself. I love questions. Chris, was there anything you wanted to add?
Well, first of all, I just wanted to say thank you to Olivia for a fascinating insight into what's going on in the world right now. I think more and more, it's like, as Einstein said, you know, without the numbers, you don't have a science. And I think now that we have this analytical data available to us, as we start to transition out of COVID-19, the ability to access this real-time data is going to make a massive difference to destinations, tour operators, airlines, and everybody else. So we are fortunate, as you quite rightly say. We've never had this before. But it was interesting. I was chatting to Carolyn earlier. There's been a very interesting development today, and I don't know whether you're aware of this because I think it's only just been announced. But Lion Air, as you're probably aware, Lion Air began their domestic operations a few weeks ago, and with some sporadic international operations to places like Saudi Arabia and India. As of tomorrow, they've cancelled all their flights completely, everything on the network. And the reason for that is because their passengers are not following the COVID-19 regulations. So this whole idea about confidence and this whole idea about people getting used to what Carolyn calls the new abnormal, I think there's a whole bunch of speed bumps that we're going to have to go over before we actually get some kind of consensus on how we're going to transition and how we're going to move forward. I just wondered what you thought about a development like that. It's something that kind of surprised me.
Well, I think you're totally right to point out to this this issue. The lack of clarity regarding the rules of the game is what's hurting the industry the most at the moment. People do not dare to book their holiday, especially abroad, because they just don't know what kind of security is attached to this booking. You know, I will not give any name, but I know that some airlines give themselves the possibility to cancel a flight up to 2 hours before departure time. Okay, if they realize that the economics of this flight are not right, that they're going to lose money, they just cancel the flight. Now, how can you book a trip in a world like this? It's impossible. You know, if you don't know how which rules will be applied in the airport, if you will, I mean, how you will be handled upon arrival, how you will be handled when flying back, if you will be able to transit or not in a given place. What happens if your transit flight is cancelled? All of those things are big question marks in the mind of consumers, and those are major hurdles on the way to recovery. Think about insurances as well. I mean, we tend to have a focus on leisure tourism, but the business tourism is very important. Business travel. Which company is going to send, what company is going to send its employees abroad on business if they don't know if they cannot insure those workers of them, if they don't know how they will be treated if they get sick upon arrival. Those are very practical issues that need to be solved if we want recovery to take place.
Yep. Minefield. Carolyn.
Exactly.
I think it's a different angle on the trust thing, Olivier, which is one of the things looking at that amazing booking data. I have to say, John Koldovsky, one of our other presenters, and I have been in a sidebar chatting away because we have data envy. But one of the things I look at is in this world, are we going to see the collapse in long-term forward bookings, do you think? Are you already seeing that? Is it too early to say, but your expectation is?
Based on current data, we can see a massive drop in lead time. Just to give you one example, China. We looked at this progressive recovery of the Chinese domestic market. Well, in the past few weeks, the average lead time for a trip in China was 4 days.
Wow.
4 days. So, I mean, we've never seen this before. This is, we're talking about people seeing an opportunity, believing that they will be able to catch this flight and make it to the destination of their choice, and giving it a try. So they're not planning far in advance, because they are well aware that the situation can change very, very rapidly, and that if their plane is cancelled, if their flight is cancelled, it may take a while before they see their money back, if ever. But lead times are a good thing to look at. I mean, yes, there are some very significant changes taking place at the moment, but we don't know if this is a temporary situation, or if it will last, if lead time will permanently get shorter. I believe it's got to do with a lot to do with the current situation we're in, when there is no visibility. But looking back at lead times by nationality is a smart way to go, I think, for tourism businesses that want to target those markets with whom they can do business, because there is some kind of corridor. At least it's possible to do business with these markets. And what you want now is cash. You desperately want cash now. So you want to target those source markets that tend to book last minute. So if you look, I don't know, if you look at Europe, for example, for long haul trips, you know that you're probably much better off targeting a Spaniard that tend to book more last minute than a visitor from which country? From France, for example.
Yes, and I was going to say that I wonder what lessons we can learn from that, because one of the things I've been hearing anecdotally, but your data would be able to confirm, is that there was already a softening in lead times in many markets, even before all of this hit. Is that anecdotal evidence confirmed by the data, Olivier?
I think, I mean, the current crisis can be seen as an accelerator for many things. So we think of digital transformation, for example. Okay, a lot of businesses have been talking about it for ages without actually doing it. Well, this crisis hit, and now they have to do it, and they have to do it fast. Same thing with business intelligence. Same thing with the retail sector. You know, that's been struggling for years. So a number of big malls having very serious difficulties worldwide. The crisis is accelerating those difficulties, but they were there already. There was a pre-existing situation, let's say. So I think in some cases we have an acceleration. In some other cases we have an abnormal situation. So is the abnormal the new normal? That's we need to wait a bit, I believe, before we can answer this question.
To talk about the acceleration of trends, Olivier, one of the questions we've got is from John Koldowski, one of our earlier presenters. He's saying, you know, China now has this incredibly efficient high-speed rail network. Is that growth, is that accelerating a shift from flight to rail that might already have been happening? Do you feel that that might be a change that becomes a permanent change?
Well, I believe this is an excellent point indeed. When thinking of a recovery, I think it may very well be that we never recover. If we understand recovery as going back to the pre-crisis situation, and I think that's very true for domestic travel. I believe a number of air routes for domestic travel that have been shut and for which there is now a train alternative will never reopen. because of the economics of it, but also because a number of airlines have managed to get some government bailout. And those governments, for a variety of reasons, think it's better to promote land transportation than transportation by plane. So we've seen this in a number of countries when the government says, well, we can help you out, but maybe you're not going to fly back on those routes that are served by train because of the green transition or other reasons. So when it comes to domestic travel, I think we'll never get back to the pre-crisis situation. It's not for me to judge if it's a good or a bad thing, but in terms of air connectivity, that makes a difference.
Okay,
and
great.
think about it, at the moment, for many countries, those domestic links, air links, they only make sense within an international context. Take for France, take Bordeaux, Paris, for example. Okay, Bordeaux, Paris makes sense if you can fly from Paris to any part of the world. Well, that's feeding the hub, that's making this route profitable. At least it makes some kind of sense. But if international travel is down, that doesn't make any sense anymore. And there is a high-speed train connection between Bordeaux and Paris, so why would you keep it? It's that kind of very specific cases that I think illustrates the most the transition that is taking place at the moment, and why I think we won't get back to pre-crisis levels on domestic travel.
Okay, that's great. Question from Guy in New Zealand. How dependent will be the recovery of tourism on the development of a successful vaccine? So you talked about some of the other precursors, Olivier. How will having a vaccine or not having a vaccine affect it?
It depends when we get that vaccine. I think we all hope to get it as soon as possible, but if it takes a few years, we will have adapted by then. Consumers will have adapted, destinations will have adapted to this. So I don't think the vaccine will be a quick fix. And by the time it's there and it's being widely used across the world, travel habits will have changed, processes will have changed, the whole travel ecosystem will have changed. So I think it's an enticing idea to think that if we find the vaccine, the problem is solved. But I don't believe in this.
Okay, thank you. Now a question from another of our panelists. In fact, our launch panelist, David Bierman, had a question where he said, what do you see as the post-COVID-19 paradigm for tourism? That's one tough question,
well,
David.
Yeah, it's a very tough question. Foward Keys, people tend to describe us as the people looking at the crystal ball to tell the future, but it's not a crystal ball. We look at the data sets, we look at actual things happening with an impact in the future. This is really looking into a crystal ball. So my opinion is just as good as yours. Who was the person asking the question? Guy?
It was David Bierman.
Okay. So David, my opinion is just as good as yours on this. I think there's many possible futures for the industry. One possible future is a consolidated world where we have had a massive wave of businesses going bankrupt because they have not been able to adapt or to survive to this new situation. It's only the big ones remaining. Much lower number of airlines flyings, same thing for hotel chains, etc., etc. So a much more consolidated world, which means that there is more clarity on the consumer side regarding the state of the market, prices, etc., and more standardization as well. So, you know, a number of positive aspects to this. I don't really fancy that scenario from a personal perspective. I don't like to contemplate a world that is very uniformed and with standard rules being the same everywhere and the same hotel bedroom in any part of the world. I think people travel because they are looking for experiences. They want to experience something different because they're in a different place with different people, etc., etc. So I don't fancy this scenario, but you know, it could very well happen. And at the opposite of the spectrum, we have all those big guys collapsing because we realize that extreme optimization leads to extreme fragility as well. No resilience from those big players on the market. So they collapse. And what's replacing this is the number of small scale initiatives, startups trying new business models because the old business models do not work anymore. And there it's a completely different world. It's much more difficult to read from a consumer's perspective, but I think it's also much more exciting. You know, if there's one good thing about crises is that they tend to drive innovation. So I'm really looking forward to seeing those new business models out there, those new products popping up, and our sector reinventing itself. So that could be one of the really nice legacies of the COVID-19 crisis. So
I hope so. It's funny, I filled in a questionnaire for our local business chamber here this morning, and I actually had a bit of a rant in it for that very reason, because I felt a lot of the questions were very much the way we looked at the world, the way it used to be. You know, is it about more investment in infrastructure? Do we need more products? I'm like, well, how about we need, you know, how do we facilitate innovation and looking at the world differently? So I think that's, I agree with you.
I think we need to rethink the place of tourism in our societies as well. There's been a lot of talks about over-tourism and how progressively tourists were becoming the enemy. At least they were perceived as the enemy by locals, while previously they were perceived as those nice people coming from abroad and helping the local economy. A massive shift, let's say, in the approach. We need to find balance between the different users, different types of users of those destinations, visitors and locals alike, companies willing to do business in a given destination. All of those different profiles, they need to work in synergy to make our societies more resilient, and our cities tend to have this urban prism. Our cities more attractive to live in. And I think tourism can be a force for good, but I'm also aware that it generates a lot of issues that need to be tackled. And mass tourism, the kind of mass tourism that we've experienced in the past decades, has been very damaging for the image of the sector, and we really need to rethink our business models so that we make the travel sector more attractive for travelers and locals alike.
Yes,
Olivier,
it's very interesting.
Sorry.
Go on, Chris. Go on, Chris.
I was just saying, just reading some other stuff today, you know, when we look at governments and the influence or interference by governments as we start to move towards some kind of recovery, what part do you think they'll play in either driving consumer confidence or stifling consumer confidence? And what I was reading today, and what I want to refer to, is the US announcement today. I don't know whether you've seen it, that as of 16 June, they are going to block all Chinese flights into the US because they disagree with the Chinese regulations or policy in terms of American carriers actually accessing the Chinese market. So these kind of issues, in my opinion, have the capacity to just keep knocking back consumer confidence and that willingness to want to move forward. Because as you said earlier, there is no uncertainty right now. So I was just interested about what you think about government influence or interference.
Well, you're totally right. I think we've all rediscovered the weight of government. When presenting that slide about what's needed for recovery, I mentioned that one of the elements that was paramount is the lifting of travel restrictions, and that has to do with government policies. So somehow governments have managed to put themselves at the center of any kind of recovery model. Personally, I did not think it would take place. You know, you would have told me this just a few years back, I would not have believed it, because governments were trying to were getting out of the travel sector, leaving it to private in the hands of private businesses. This situation has changed. We're seeing governments taking shares of airlines, reviving airlines that would be dead otherwise, whether we're looking at, I don't know, Italy or even South Africa is considering, again, reviving some kind of avatar of South African Airways. We've seen last week discussions concerning the bailouts of Lufthansa. Singapore Airlines is heavily subsidized by the government. Governments are back; they're everywhere. So I believe they are part of the solution, but they can also be part of the problem, and that's what you were mentioning with the geopolitical tensions that we can see between the US and China, which are also impacting on the travel sector, like any other economic sector, or maybe not like any other economic sector. Maybe it's more acute when you start looking at the travel sector, because if you forbid people from traveling, it completely stops.
We've got a question come in from Paulo Sanchez Vai. Will consumers prefer all-inclusive holidays now, do you think? Can we expect a reduction in the positive local economic impact of tourism compared to pre-COVID, at least temporarily? What do you think, Olivier?
I think that's a tough one. And if I give an answer to this, it's got nothing to do with the data sets that I have at my disposal. Once more, it's looking at that crystal ball. I think all-inclusive holidays tend to give that feeling of safety, or at least, it gives people the impression that things are under control. They book their holiday and then they're good. If they can reach the destination, they're good. And it's a no-brainer, and I believe people will be looking for, after the stressful period many of them have gone through, they'll be looking for ways to relax, and an all-inclusive holiday is maybe the right format for that kind of things. I believe it would be interesting to look at what happened in the past with previous crises, and I believe this is part of human psychology. So probably we need to look at what happened, and it's likely that something similar would happen now, because it's about people getting rid of the stress that they've accumulated in the past few months, and that trying to reload the battery. So how are they reloading the battery? Are they reloading their batteries better within the framework of a packaged all-inclusive holiday, or are they reloading better if they're exploring on their own, roaming the world, going to places that are for them to explore. I don't know. I guess it depends on the specific psychological profile of each visitor.
It's interesting. Like I say, you know, similarly, I haven't got any data or anything else. I've just got sort of, you know, inconsequential conversations that I've had with friends and family. And actually, they've been saying the opposite of what Polo's suggesting, is that they would be less likely to go on all-inclusives and mingle with other people, but more likely to, for example, take a villa somewhere and, you know, stay in that small family unit in a safe environment, not mixing with others, not having to go to the buffet and God knows what other minefields there are out there. Just interesting.
They will need to feel safe, that's for sure. So if it's a package, all-inclusive holiday, it needs to give you the assurance that that you will be safe, that the right protocols are in place, and that you can go there and relax. You know, they will be looking for peace of mind. So if your protocols are not in order, if you do not manage to convey this feeling of this is safe, this is not going to work.
We do have a little bit of data here in Australia from Airbnb, Jed. Now, I don't actually have the percentage in front of me, but within borders of our state structure, we've had intra-state travel restrictions have been lifted. And what Airbnb told us was very similar to the pattern that Olivier showed with the flight bookings. Almost immediately, Airbnb saw, I think it was something like a 450% spike in bookings, but it was bookings for remote regional properties, to take to Polo's thing. So very much they saw that same pattern of unlocking that demand, but that demand was very much channeled to the point that you were talking about, Olivier, of people feeling safe, wanting to go somewhere remote. We're hearing that. I saw the STR global data has come out. They've been looking at forward bookings across the world, and they've seen a very consistent theme of the top and the bottom in terms of accommodation bookings. So luxury is going up and basic is going up. So there's a huge hollowing out of the middle, which I think is that kind of, often that's where the more cookie cutter type product can be, whereas at the bottom, often, you know, camping, we've got caravan industry associations that apparently there are 19% of Australians are ready to get back on the road and go out on a caravan and camping holiday. So we've got that kind of really basic, we don't have a lot of money, but we still want to travel at one end. And then at the top end, that really bespoke seeming to come through. So there is some data. So again, the anecdotes are being roughly supported by the data that I'm seeing.
Yeah, I think it makes sense. Niche tourism is going to be an opportunity in the coming months, because we'll see specific profiles of travelers looking for specific types of experiences, whether it's it's the adventure that they will be looking for, or it's the great outdoors, or it's just reconnecting with the family in a remote spot in the Australian outback, or people will be looking for very specific experiences. And if you're a tourism business out there and you are able to provide that kind of experiences that people will be looking for, I guess you'll have a business. But it's all about identifying consumer needs.
Brilliant. A quick question from Dov, who I think is hoping that you will do a bit more of a dive into those different booking profiles by market, Olivier. So he's saying, regarding the lead time of various source markets, data to compare those markets. He's based in Israel and just did a survey and found that 54% of respondents intend to travel abroad in 2020. Any comparisons by markets that you're able to share us on lead times or forward booking profiles?
I would recommend to keep a close eye on the fowardkeys.com website, because we intend to publish a study on this very specific topic early next week. So stay tuned. I'm not going to reveal the outcomes of this study for now, but it's coming. And we'll be looking at European outbound for long-haul trips.
And that's actually an excellent segue to our next question, which is Lo from Singapore. He's going, this was an excellent presentation on the value of data. How can small businesses access this kind of important travel data? Is this a subscription? How do we make sense of interpreting the data as small companies? So
if you're a really small company with a very limited budget, it's probably a good idea to team up with maybe your local DMO or your national DMO and see if they can get access to our platform and help you derive insights from that. We work with a lot of different businesses, destinations, of course, airports, of course, but also retailers, brands, media agencies, you name it, hospitality. Anyone interested in being able to anticipate the future based on current actual data. So there's a lot of possibilities when it comes to getting access to the data. So I'd say just reach out to us or check out with your DMO if they're already working together with us, and we can take it from there.
Can I just add to that, Olivier? And I hope you don't mind. But obviously I've got first-hand experience of working with Foward Keys in Valencia. And just to point out for Lo and for all of our audience as well, I don't know, how many analysts have you got at the moment in Foward Keys? Got a big analyst team.
Well, if we're looking just at the people trying to analyze market trends and make sense of the data points, we're looking at 12 people. Yeah. But if you would look at all the data scientists that we're using, that are also connecting the dots in different ways, combining data sets and things like that, we're more looking at around 50 people.
Yeah. But I think it's just to sort of get across that point that, as we know, data is nothing without, without the insights which are derived from that data. And that's, a point of, huge importance on Foward Keys and the work you do with your clients, right? It's helping your clients to actually make sense of the data and to gain valuable insights which they can use. And I know it's Laura Rodriguez who heads up the team, and she's practically a genius in my humble opinion. But as are most of the guys at Foward Keys. I always say this. Sorry, now it sounds like I'm doing a plug for Foward Keys, but I have to say this: I've never worked with a more impressive and talented group of varied and a lot of them very young as well. But the team you've got there are just on another level with in terms of the insights and analysis that they derive from this stuff. So
wow, Jed, thank you so much. I'll share the recording with the team. I'm sure they'll love it.
Yeah. And tell Olivier he owes me £5 for that one as well.
Well, actually, I can probably add to that a little bit. And one thing I would say, Lo, is if you actually don't have your local, do STB buy, Olivier, Singapore Tourist Board? Do they buy? Because Lo is based in Singapore.
No. We work with Changi Airport.
Changi.
That's
okay. So going to see Changi would be the place to go. But if you're looking to kind of go and put pressure on your STOs or LTOs, that Olivier had touched base on the Foward Keys website. I've used some of that. We've put some proposals through together in partnership with some of the tourism teams at Foward Keys. And there's some really great case study material and some really great examples on there that you can use to gain some insight from, first of all, but secondly, that you can use to say, look, we could go and get this kind of data, and can we collaborate as an industry to do that sort of work? So, there are obviously the really deep data is behind a paywall, and in my view it bloody well ought to be. There are too many people in tourism who think people like Olivier and I do our jobs for free. We still have mortgages and kids to well, he has kids, I have a cat, which is even more expensive. It should be valuable, but there are great resources on the sites, on sites like Olivier's, on sites like ours, that you can actually use to help you with some of this stuff. So start there as your journey and use that to go away and have those conversations with that. And I'm sure if you, as a small company, were to contact Foward Keys and say, look, who can we go and talk to, who we could buddy up with to do some of this stuff, I'm sure that, they'd be delighted to help you, wouldn't you, Olivier?
Definitely. definitely.
Okay.
I think in the end, there is also a cost of not doing anything
Yes.
with data. In terms of missed opportunities, in terms of budget being used in an inefficient way.
Yes.
And it's not just about Foward Keys data, it's just about being data driven. And you often, it starts with being square with how you use your own data, the data that you produce as a business. What's the quality of your internal monitoring? That's a good way to start. What do you do with your website statistics? What do you do with customer surveys, satisfaction surveys, whatever? And then trying to connect the dots, identifying what your needs are. Maybe your needs are Foward can be answered by Foward Keys data, and then that's great for us. But maybe it's something totally different that you need to thrive. But you need to identify that data that will make a difference for your business.
Yes, I'm not going to disagree with you.
Yeah.
And it's funny because the other one that I get, because I do qualitative research as well as data, Olivier, the number of clients who have come to me to test an ad campaign because they've launched it without research and found it's not working. And what I like to say to them is the only bit of the process that doesn't cost more to do, whether you do it before or afterwards, is that research piece. It costs the same for me to do those focus groups or that online bulletin board, whether I do it before or afterwards. But if you come to me afterwards, you've probably then spent millions on production, on media buying. So I think respect for evidence is, I'd probably have to absolve the people on this call. I'd say that because what we found for this audience has been that they've been incredibly engaged and hungry for evidence. But as an industry, I still think we tend to rely on the kind of finger in the wind far more than we should do, given the way we want our industry to grow. Rant over, I do promise. Now I noticed we've had a few people raise hands, and I've put this into the chat box, but I probably did want to, as we get to the end of the time we've got, just to make sure if there are any more questions, we can't deal with you putting your hand up and us clicking the radio on, the sound on, because it will just go crazy. If you do have questions, we're quite happy to keep chatting for a bit, or at least I hope you can stay with us, Olivier, to do that. If anyone wants a couple more minutes to see if there are any more questions to go with. So if some of you were just because I know it is quite easy to hit some of those buttons by accident, don't worry. But if you did want to ask a question that we haven't covered, please take a moment to do it now.
Dov has just asked if we could put up the contact details of Olivier again. If
I can do that.
Yeah,
I'm
just
going
his
to do
last
that.
slide.
There we go.
There you go. There you go. Job done. That was an easy one.
If only they were all that easy.
Yeah.
I'm just going to have a quick look, see if there's anything else that's come through. And he said, can we upload the presentation? And yes, we will most definitely be doing that. Jed, you might want to reiterate, just in case someone was not on the call at the beginning, on the webinar at the beginning, what the procedures are from here in terms of disseminating all the amazing information that Olivier has shared, so generously shared today.
Yeah, you will find it all on eventually once we get it up shortly afterwards. All on the wetac.org website, WTACH.org website, and you'll find a section there on the Keeping the Dream Alive Expert Recovery Series. So you'll find videos of today's session. You'll also find the presentations and then also the podcasts as well. So that's your one-stop shop for all of the information and anything that you need on that.
I've just put up the WeTac address, so if somebody wants to go into the chat box and just copy and paste it, they can pick it up from there.
Perfect.
And I'm looking at any other questions that we've got at this point. I can't see that we've got any. Were there any that you wanted to add, guys?
I think we've well done. I think we've covered it. I think we've gone through quite a lot there. We've got a lot of the sort of the personal opinions of you as well, Olivier, as well as the sort of the data stuff. And I think that's been important, because obviously you've been, you know, in the industry and a key player in the industry for many years. So I suppose just before we go, what you know, given your experience in the industry, what do you think are the biggest opportunities for our industry going forward?
I think we've tackled this already, honestly. I think that the big opportunity this gives us is to take the time to rethink what we are, what we do, and where we want to go, how we want to do it, how we want to do it better than we've done it in the past. I believe doing it better means doing it being you know, data-minded, data-driven. But it's not all that is needed. You need to have a vision for the future. You need to envision the role of your business in a more global context. I really believe in tourism for good. I really believe that our sector can make a difference. But as I said, I also believe that it can make a lot of damage, and it has made a lot of damage in the damages in the past. So we need to rethink what we do, how we do it, so that our businesses can thrive and make our destinations better places.
Perfect. Well, that seems like a pretty good place to end on. So look, thank you very much, Olivier. I'll hand over to Chris, really for his final remarks as the president and chairman of WETAC. Chris, would you like to give us your final remarks? The last episode.
Yeah, I can't believe it's the last episode, and I think what a fantastic way to finish, Olivier. That was terrific, and we're very, very grateful for your time and for all the effort you've put into your presentation today. I'm sure all our listeners, and we've had a fantastic consistent group of people who have been with us for the entire series. I'm sure they're all going to benefit from your insights and your observations and your comments. So sincere gratitude and thanks for your input today. It means a lot to us. And for all our members who are listening, and for all our supporters who, you know, without them we couldn't make this series happen. For all our followers on the various different social media channels, and of course for our audience, again, we hope from the 12 episodes that we've produced and run over the last few weeks, which has been pretty exhausting, I have to say, and I'm sure Jed and Carolyn will agree with me on that. I hope that some of the insights that we've shared, some of the information that you've gleaned, some of the observations and recommendations that have been given, all help you transition out of this incredibly unique and challenging environment that we're in. From a personal perspective, I just want to sincerely thank Carolyn and Jed for all their efforts. You know, Jed getting up at 5 o'clock every morning to run these series, and Carolyn doing an amazing job behind the scenes, from holding up a poster saying "We've lost your sound," doing all the production at the other end. So I think that's my final my closing comments, and really what it's all meant to say is thank you. Thanks to everybody for tuning in and for supporting where we need to be. As I've said before, if you want to join WETAC, we have a very low membership price base or price point. So please, you know, join the family and help us to make a difference, a positive difference for the future. Thanks very much indeed. Jed, I'll hand it over to you.
That's it. So that's it for us. Thank you all again so much for your participation. This series has been hosted by me, Jed Brown of Low Season Traveller, and the producer has been Carolyn Childs of My Travel Research. Thank you all very much. Have a great day, have a great afternoon, and have a great evening. Cheerio.